Welcome to TLDR, a new series where I summarize books that I thought were good. Today, I'm talking about Cinder, a futuristic twist on the fairy tale Cinderella. Let's get started. In Chapter 1, we are introduced to Cinder, who is a cyborg. After suffering a fatal car accident that cost her a literal arm and leg, she underwent a life-saving surgery at the cost of becoming a second-hand citizen. There's actually a scene in Cinder where some kids are playing too close to Cinder's booth, and the mother of one of the kids scolds her son for it. Remember this scene, by the way, because it's plot relevant. Anyway, our main character is also a very accomplished mechanic. She's so good at her job that the Prince of New Beijing asked her to fix her tutor android. By the way, the whole story takes place in New Beijing. When she asks him for more details about the android, he tries to lie to her about the reason. I say this because Cinder actually has the ability to detect lies, and she picked up on this due to her cyber brain. She also has a computer in her brain, but that's not really relevant to the plot. That is how she's such a great mechanic, because she can look up whatever she needs to fix whatever she needs to. After this introduction with the prince, we are also introduced to an android called Aiko. This android actually has a faulty personality chip that gives her a more human personality. After the interaction with the prince, Cinder replaces her leg with a new one she bought. Afterwards, an uproar is started over a booth owner who is showing signs of the blue fever. The blue fever, also known as litomycosis, is a disease that has a 100% death rate at this point in the story. In Chapter 2, one of the shop owners gets her shop burned down after showing signs of the blue fever, and Cinder decides to sneak away from them before they try to put her in quarantine as well. When Cinder arrives home, we are introduced to Cinder's family, well, her step-family. Audrey, Cinder's stepmom, is a bitch. There's no other way to put it. She treats Cinder like property and forces her to work as a mechanic to bring in basically their only source of income. Audrey also holds a grudge against Cinder over the death of her husband, who died of blue fever as well. We are also introduced to Cinder's stepsisters, Pearl and Peony. Pearl is a typical evil stepsister, and Peony, on the other hand, is actually nice to Cinder. In this chapter, we also learn about the cyborg draft, in which cyborgs are either volunteered or drafted as guinea pigs for blue fever antidote testing. Anyone who's tested on in these experiments ends up dead because the blue fever has a 100% death rate. However, they do reimburse the family. We also learn that the emperor is dying from blue fever. The last thing to mention in this chapter is that there is a ball that happens every year, and Audrey says that Cinder can go if she fixes the hover car. By the way, this whole story takes place in the future, so they don't have regular cars, they just have hover cars and stuff like that. There's other aspects as well that we'll get into about their future, but not right now. Also, when Audrey says that Cinder can go to the ball when she fixes the hover car, Cinder, because she can detect lies, she detects that she has no intention of keeping this promise. In Chapter 3, Cinder admits to Aiko that she can't and won't go to the ball. She also decides that she needs to go to the junkyard to find parts in order to fix Audrey's hover car, and Peony, the nice stepsister, decides to tag along. In Chapter 4, Cinder, Peony, and Aiko arrive at the junkyard, and we learn a little bit more about the universe these characters live in. Peony and Cinder talk about the prince, and Cinder promises to introduce her to the prince. Eventually, the topic of conversation veers towards Queen Lavana and the Lunars. Lunars are people who evolved on a moon colony and gained the ability to control people's minds, which made them greedy and violent. And Queen Lavana, their ruler, is the worst of them. There are rumors that she knows when people are talking about her, even on Earth. They say she killed her older sister to take her throne, killed her own husband so she could marry someone a bit more beneficial politically, forced her 13-year-old stepsister to mutilate herself for being more beautiful than Queen Lavana, and murdered her 3-year-old niece, who was the only heir to the throne, basically. Remember this for later, by the way. Also, Cinder finds an old car, which is basically just a regular car to us, like a car with wheels and stuff like that, and she has an idea to use it to travel out of town and escape her stepmom. And finally, a major conflict kicks off with Peony showing signs of the blue plague. Basically, anyone with the blue plague, they get these blue bruises around their skin, and Peony fucking has them. In Chapter 5, Peony is taken to the quarantine and Cinder is tested for the blue plague. but it comes up negative. And Cinder deals with the inner conflict as she begins to suspect that Peenie's condition is her fault. Because if you remember in like chapter 1 and 2, she left the market because someone had the blue fever and she was never tested. In chapter 6, Cinder returns home to find a pissed off Audrey who is blaming Cinder for Peenie's diagnosis. And I want to highlight some of the problems Cinder struggles with as a cyborg, namely ridicule from Audrey and Pearl. But Audrey outlines some of the stereotypes that cyborgs deal with. You see, Cinder can biologically not cry, like she's incapable of it because she doesn't have tear ducts as a result of the surgery. And Audrey doesn't believe that Cinder can experience love or sadness because of it, especially for Peony. She also scolds her for her inability to cry as a side effect of being a cyborg. Audrey is so angry with Cinder that she volunteers Cinder for the cyborg draft, knowing that she won't come back alive. In chapter 7, we are introduced to Dr. Erlon, who's the head of the Blue Plague experiments, basically. Two things to know about this character at the moment is that he regularly has hallucinations and he only experiments on young girls, but not for the reason you think. In chapter 8, Cinder is prepped to undergo experimentation, and we learn a few things about Cinder. First, we learn that Cinder has a reoccurring nightmare about being burned alive, and we learn that Cinder is 32.78% cyborg, which is less important, but it's just a fun fact. We also learn that the testing process, which consists of injecting leishmaniasis microbes into the patient that are tracked as they infect the patient, basically. Eventually, the virus will enter the second stage, which causes the blue spots to appear on the patient. This is when the patient will be injected with the antibodies that should fight off the disease, but obviously it never does. Hypothetically, it should though. The chapter ends with Cinder being injected with the virus. In chapter 9, the doctors and Dr. Erlon monitor Cinder as the virus works its way through her body. The doctor notices a chip on Cinder's spine that seems to serve no particular purpose. In a shocking turn of events, the doctor realizes that Cinder is actually fighting off the virus before she was even injected with the antibodies. In chapter 10, nothing much happens, but Cinder is moved to a different room where she meets Dr. Erlon in person. I also want to mention that she had a wrench hidden in her robot leg that she was going to use to attack the doctor basically and try to escape, but then inexplicably for no reason she has second thoughts about it. It's going to be important for later, so remember that. In chapter 11, Dr. Erlon and Cinder discuss Cinder's past, and Cinder reveals that she was indeed in a car accident that turned her cyborg and also killed her biological parents. More importantly, Cinder reveals that she can't remember anything past the age of 11, which is when she had the actual car accident. Dr. Erlon and Cinder come to an agreement that they will continue experimenting on Cinder to try to find a cure, and Cinder will be compensated without her mother's knowledge, so her mother can't take her income basically, and Peony will be the first one to get the cure, with the exception of the king, who is still suffering from leishmaniasis at this point in the story. In chapter 12, the focus is on the prince from chapter 1, Prince Kai. His name is Kai, by the way. His father, the emperor, is suffering from the plague, and Kai fears that he's going to have to become the new emperor if his father actually does die from this disease. We are also introduced to Cant, who is the royal advisor and Kai's guide throughout the story. We are also introduced to Sybil Mira, the lunar ambassador from the moon, basically, and head thaumaturge and spy for Queen Lavanna. She begins to talk to Kai about a peace agreement which was proposed by Queen Lavanna and his father. This proposal has been going back and forth between Lavanna and the emperor and never came to fruition because the king never met his demands. Sybil and the queen hope that Prince Kai will meet the queen's demands. Kai also admits to Contorin that he is looking for the fabled heir to the lunar throne, the 3-year-old that everyone thinks that Queen Lavanna killed. To elaborate, this 3-year-old is the focus of a lot of conspiracy theories saying that, she survived and she is like a refugee on Earth, basically hiding out from her evil sister or her evil aunt, basically. However, his only lead was the android that he had brought to Cinder in chapter 1 to fix. In Chapter 13, Dr. Erlon and Cinder talk about Cinder's cyborg features, and fun fact, she is biologically incapable of blushing due to being a cyborg. During this analysis, Cinder asked the doctor if she would have been able to give Peony the plague when she returned home from the shop the night Peony was diagnosed. Her suspicions are denied, however, because the doctor says that she couldn't have brought the disease into her home and given it to Peony because of how long the disease can survive on a person. Dr. Erlon also mentions the chip that's in her neck, and Cinder has no idea what it's for. So Dr. Erlon decides to disable the chip, which causes Cinder to pass out from pain. In Chapter 14, Kai goes to Dr. Erlon to ask him about progress on the cure and meets Cinder again. He also almost discovers that she's cyborg, but for some reason Dr. Erlon decides to keep her secret safe. In Chapter 15, Cinder returns home to Audrey and they have a very awkward moment. Keep in mind, Audrey sent her basically to her death, she knew she wasn't coming back. But they argue for a bit, and then afterwards Cinder formulates a plan to use the money she gets from being tested for letumosis to fix the old car she found in the junkyard and run away on the night of the ball, when Pearl and Audrey won't be home. It's also revealed that Aiko was ordered to throw away all of Peony's stuff, but the android, in her sentimental struggle, decides to keep the dress that Peony was supposed to wear to the ball. In Chapter 16, the king dies in the middle of the night, and Kai has to face the reality of becoming the new emperor of the Commonwealth. Literally moments after Kai learns of his father's death, Queen Levana herself video calls him and announces that she is coming to visit him on Earth. We also learn that the queen always wears a veil when video calling and despises mirrors because she cannot mind control them. In Chapter 17, Cinder learns that Peony has entered the 3rd stage of letumosis, and she goes to visit her in the quarantine. While there, she finds Sasha, the woman whose shop got burned down in Chapter 2. She dies, her last wish being to see her son. When Sasha dies, one of the Medroids, robot nurses basically, takes her ID chip from her corpse. These ID chips are in everyone's wrists, and they are the equivalent to social security numbers for people like us. When Cinder asks the Medroid why it's going around taking people's ID chips away, the Medroid basically says it was programmed to, and offers no other elaboration. In Chapter 18, Cinder runs into Kai on her way to Dr. Erlon, and Kai tells her about his troubles over a very long elevator ride. He also tells her about Queen Levana's visit to the palace. He also requests that Cinder call him Kai instead of Your Highness, which I mention only because it shows their attraction towards each other. He also asks Cinder to go to the ball with him, and she declines because, if you remember, she plans to run away that night. Aside from the fact that Cinder is a cyborg and they are viewed as second-hand citizens in the society. In Chapter 19, Cinder and Dr. Erlon talk about Cinder's discovery of the stolen ID chips, and the doctor explains that one potential reason for this could be that they are sold to Lunars who are trying to hide on Earth. Cinder then tells Dr. Erlon that the Queen is coming to New Beijing, and the doctor tells her that she has to leave the palace and not come back until the Queen has left. When she asks him why, he confesses that after an analysis of her blood sample, he found out that she herself is a Lunar. In fact, she is a special class of Lunar known as a shell. Shells are Lunars who can't be mind controlled. However, they also can't do mind control either. He goes on to explain that the Queen hates shells because she can't control them, and anytime they are born on the lunar colony, they are immediately killed at birth, unless they flee to Earth. He goes on to say that if the Queen finds her at the palace, she will be killed on sight. In Chapter 20, the Queen arrives on Earth in a ship made of shiny, dazzling metal. We get to see a glimpse of her mind control abilities when Kai greets her upon landing, and he becomes infatuated her for a second before snapping back to reality. In Chapter 21, Cinder begins work on Kai's android and finds a decom chip, a chip that allows for communication without the net. It also allows for a private communication. She plugs the chip into a net screen, which is like a phone or a tablet, and it gives her the following prompt that says, initiating a direct link with an unknown user. Please wait. While this is happening, the android powers on and exposits that Kai was indeed searching for Princess Celine. In Chapter 22, Cinder decides to go to the palace to deliver the fixed android to Kai. But she is stopped at the gate as a group of rioters protest Queen Levana's presence within the palace. We get to see just how truly strong Queen Levana's powers are when she takes one look at the rioters, and all of a sudden all the rioters turn around and leave, leaving Cinder as the only one who was immune to her influence because of her cyborg brain telling her that it was a lie. But it wasn't completely effective. Cinder for a moment was under the influence of Levana as well. In Chapter 23, the Queen demands that the lunar she saw in the crowd, which is Cinder, be captured immediately, or else she will send her own soldiers to capture her for Kai. She also delivers a gift for Kai, the cure for leishmaniasis. Keep in mind that she contacted Kai moments after the Emperor's death, meaning she had the antidote and withheld it intentionally, just so the king would die and Kai would have to become the Emperor. She also implies that an alliance with her is the only way to get his hands on the cure for leishmaniasis for good. In Chapter 24, Kai and Cinder find each other in the palace and they start talking and bonding and stuff like that. They talk about the android and come to the conclusion that the chip that was in the android was lunar, as evidenced by Cinder's observation of it being shiny and dazzling, just like the ship that Queen Levana landed in. Also, Kai also asks Cinder to the ball once again, and she says she can't because her sister has the plague, which is mostly true. Cinder collapses in pain, so Kai takes her to see Dr. Erlan. In Chapter 25, Kai gives Dr. Erlan the leishmaniasis cure. Cinder and the doctor find it weird that Cinder was affected by Levana even though she is supposed to be a shell. Dr. Erlan admits that he lied to her about her diagnosis. Jesus Christ. Her diagnosis. But that she is in fact lunar. He goes on to talk about how he researched Cinder's adopted father Garen, who died of blue fever. He explains that Cinder's father made a device that disables a lunar's power or prevents a human from being affected by lunars. That device was the chip that is in Cinder's neck. He also explains that the chip was beneficial to Cinder because lunars who choose not to use their powers slowly go insane. Then Dr. Erlan lets it slip that he is also a lunar, and that he is going insane from not using his powers. He reveals that he hates the queen for killing his shell daughter, and that he has been looking for Cinder, but not because of her immunity. Intentionally, he keeps her in the dark. Then the doctor gives Cinder half of the antidote so her sister can be cured. In Chapter 27, Cinder rushes to the quarantine. All the while, Audrey is texting it. Cinder ignores Audrey because she is trying to save Audrey's daughter from blue fever. Unfortunately, before Cinder can give the antidote to Peony dies in Cinder's arms. A Medroid tries to take Peony's ID chip, but Cinder stops the android and takes the chip herself. In Chapter 26, Kai attends a meeting with the other world leaders as they discover that the queen is secretly building an army. Spoiler alert, they're pretty much werewolves. Before she escapes the quarantine, she gives Sunto, the boy from Chapter 1, the antidote instead. See, I told you he was important. She doesn't get very far because the police apprehend Cinder on the grounds that Audrey believes she was trying to run away. In Chapter 28, Levana and Kai have dinner together, and Levana is appalled when she finds that the servant had served her a mirror with her food. Remember, the queen hates mirrors. In retaliation, Levana decides that the servant has to die for her actions. Kai takes the blame for the servant, claiming it was a prank. He later discovers that it was Levana who had put the mirror on the plate to test Kai. In Chapter 29, Audrey accuses Cinder of trying to run away and is angry at her for buying a new leg. As punishment, she takes Cinder's leg and forbids her from going anywhere besides her home and the mechanic booth. This includes going to the ball. Audrey also destroyed Aiko, leaving only her personality chip intact. In Chapter 30, Cinder continued to repair her car for the day of the ball, when she was planning to escape. But right before the ball, Kai shows up at her booth and brings her a gift, still hoping she will come with him to the ball. Pearl, the evil stepsister, snatches the gloves that was a gift from Kai and makes fun of Cinder for her relationship with the prince, taking it upon herself to tell Kai about her cyborg secret at the ball. In chapter 31, Cinder gets ready for her escape, and Prince Kai becomes Emperor Kai. In chapter 32, as Cinder is preparing to leave, the net screen with the decom chip in it finally connected to the caller on the other line. We are introduced to a girl that for now I'm going to call Mystery Girl. Mystery Girl reveals that she is a lunar spy who was forced to be the Queen's programmer. The chip was her attempt to warn Kai that as soon as he goes through with a marriage alliance with Queen Levana, she is going to kill him and take over the Commonwealth with her new political power. She also mentions that the Queen knows about Kai's attempts to find Princess Celine and has sent people to hunt down everyone involved, even an old lady who housed the princess for a long time. Remember that, because it's going to be important for later. Not in this book, but others. Cinder decides to warn him at the ball before it's too late. In chapter 33, Cinder, wearing the gloves that Kai had gifted her, Peony's dress, Pearl's extra pair of shoes, and her old leg, she drives in a beaten up old car to the ball, and makes it even after crashing the car into a tree. When she gets to the ball, she spots Pearl talking to Kai, and she assumes that she is telling him about her cyborg secret. A guard spots her in the rain-soaked, dirty gown and asks her to let him scan her ID. What happens next is like that scene from SpongeBob. Apparently, Kai was hoping she would still come and made her a special guest. Unfortunately, her presence was then announced. Keep in mind that her stepmom forbid her from coming, and the Queen of Psychic Psycho Moon People wants her dead on sight. In chapter 34, Audrey yells at Cinder and prepares to pimp slap her. Oh shit. In chapter 34, Audrey yells at Cinder and prepares to pimp slap her, until Kai swoops in and stops her. Kai takes her to the dance floor, and as they are dancing, she learns that Pearl never told Kai about her cyborg secret, and that Kai learned about her stepsister's death instead. Aside from that, Cinder warns Kai about Levana's plot. Chapter 35, after Kai learns about the Queen's plot, he admits that regardless, he has no choice but to marry the Queen because it's his responsibility as the Emperor to protect its citizens. In her desperation, Cinder kisses Kai, her idea being that the Queen won't be able to marry Kai if he's already spoken for. Allegedly. Anyway, this doesn't work because the Queen gives zero fucks about monogamy. Furthermore, the Queen exposes Cinder for being a lunar. Chapter 36, Levana gives Kai no choice but to forfeit Cinder's life for the good of the Commonwealth. He, however, gives this stipulation that Cinder will be held in prison, not executed, until Levana returns to the moon. During this, Cinder notices that Levana's face looks strange. Her scanner showed that what Levana's face should look like and what it does look like are not the same. Since Levana's illusions cannot fool a machine, and Cinder is partly a machine, Cinder realizes that the Queen is using a glamour to hide something ugly. The Queen, seeing that Cinder cannot be fooled by her illusions, basically turns into low-tier god for a second, and tries to mind control her into killing herself with a gun from one of the guards. But the chip in her neck prevents the mind control and allows Cinder to attempt an escape. I say attempt because her robot foot falls off as she's running down some stairs and she gets arrested. Wait a minute. In chapter 37, Dr. Erlon shows up in Cinder's cell, claiming to need blood samples from her. In reality, he delivers a new, decked-out robot arm and leg. Seriously though, she's like a go-go gadget with every finger. She has like a flashlight in one finger, a knife in the other, a projectile gun, a screwdriver, and a connector cable. Anyway, he tells her he's going to Africa and that she needs to meet him there. He also drops a huge lore bomb because the big secret that he was keeping from her is that, well, at least one of the big secrets he was keeping from her is that Cinder is not a shell and not just any lunar. She is actually Princess Celine, and that if she dies here, then pretty much the whole world is doomed and she's gonna be captured and killed and the Queen's gonna take over the world But anyway, that's the end of the first book in the Lunar Chronicle series, Cinder. I think for my next TLDR project, I'm gonna do a different book, either Renegades, which is by the same author as this book. By the way, she's a very talented author, Marissa Meyer. Shout out to fucking Marissa Meyer. But anyway, either I'm gonna do Renegades by Marissa Meyer, or I'm going to do what's it called? A Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. Either way. Actually, vote down in the comments. Do you want to do Steelheart or Renegades? They're both about superheroes and like trying to kill superheroes. But vote down in the comments if you want me to do a TLDR on Brandon Sanderson Steelheart or Marissa Meyer's Renegades.